bunch more people join, so I'm just going to give another second there. All right, well, it's going to have people joining us for the next few minutes, so I'm going to just start. So we're just going to do a little housekeeping before we start with the introductions. So first off, thank you guys for being here. We will be recording this session. There's a lot of students who unfortunately have conflicts with their class schedules, so we are going to record this information session, and we will share it next week with the PowerPoints. So you can take copious amount of notes, but we will be sharing these PowerPoints next week with the recordings. Little disclaimer, we've done our best to compile all these informations from the federal and the provincial sites to make sure we have the most up-to-date and accurate information. Some of this information does change from time to time, so we do the best to have the most accurate and up-to-date information, but it is your responsibility to validate with the external funding agencies when applying to make sure that things haven't changed or there isn't any discrepancies, because the rules trump all other rules. So again, we're going to be recording this session. So if you want to post questions near the end and you don't want your face to be on this recording that will be on YouTube, feel free to turn off your camera. It's very important to turn off your mic throughout the presentations, because as much as I like hearing my voice, the hearing of the echo of my voice on surround sound gets a bit disruptive for everybody. You'll have lots of questions. I'm hoping throughout the presentation we will answer your questions. However, just to keep a good flow, we will not be answering questions by raises of hands during the presentations. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I have a bunch of my colleagues who are going to be answering some of the questions in the chat, and the ones that are more complex, we will save them for the end, and I will read them and try to address them at the end. There should be ample amount of time at the end to address any questions. And just as a heads up, I know this seems early for a lot of students once we start looking at deadlines. A lot of the PhD deadlines are fast approaching, and the MAs are a bit later. We will be doing a second, more condensed version for the MAs once you get more into it, to address more of your specific questions about the MA presentations. Right now is just to give you a general overview of what's out there. Because there's a wide array of scholarships available for fourth years, master's students and PhD students. Okay, so that's the housekeeping. On to the introductions. So I'm going to start off with, my name is Terry Krauk. I'm the Administrator of Graduate Studies here at the Faculty of Social Science for the Graduate Studies Office. And I'm accompanied today by...
Hi, I'm Sylvie Frigo. I'm the Vice Dean of Graduate Studies at the Faculty of Social Science. So welcome to this session. So probably you're asking yourselves, should I apply for those scholarships? It's a lot of work, yes, and it's a lot of, there's no promise of success. However, it is very important that you do it, because if you do get the funding, it's good money. It's really tuition relief, and if it's really good for you to help finalize and submit your thesis at some point and finish your graduate studies. So, and also it's a good practice if you're going to be going into research. But it is competitive. It's a lot of work, but it can be very rewarding. So I would say, please stay with us during this session and you will understand a bit more about how it works. Terry.
So there's really two types of funding that we're going to be talking about, and there's various variations within those types of fundings. So we're talking about external fundings. We're not talking about the admission scholarships and the merit scholarships, which are dealt with at the admissions things. We're talking about supplemental fundings that are done by the province or the federal government. So the first one that we're looking at is the three councils of the federal government. So we have Shirk, which is more around the social sciences. We have CIHR, which is focusing more about the health, and then we have NSERC, which is around the science and engineering. So the majority of our students fall under Shirk, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council. So this, when we're talking about the federal funding and Shirk funding, we're usually talking about the social sciences and humanities research councils. Now, there are some of our students in psychology in particular that will sometimes be funded through the CIHR, the health research, depending on the research topic, or the NSERC with the more science approach. But the majority of our students are funded at the Shirk through the Shirk funding agency. So there are 2 competitions. We're going to go through the dates in a little. These competitions, unfortunately, are only available for Canadian or permanent resident students. So there is, unfortunately, very limited options for the international students. We will get to it in the provincial funding in the next few slides. But unfortunately, for the federal funding agencies, it is limited to the Canadian students. So for a master's scholarship, it is judged internally. We have an institutional quota. The scholarship is $17,500 for the year, so that's a decent amount of money, and we have an internal quota. For the Shirk federal funding at the PhD level, there's 2 different levels of it. There's the fellowship and there's the doctoral Shirk scholarship, and it ranges from 20 to 35,000. Typically, there are some variations on there depending on how many semesters you completed, but we're talking about really, really good money. So the PhD one is a bit different from the master's. So the master's, it's all dealt with in-house, the competition. But the doctoral one, we do an institutional evaluation, and then we have to recommend files to the national competition, but we don't have a guaranteed amount of scholarships for the doctoral competition. So we're going to go into details about the different eligibility criteria for these, the different timelines for these, but these are the federal funding options. The provincial options are twofold. So we have the Ontario Graduate Scholarships. We're an Ontario university. We are eligible for the Ontario Graduate Scholarships. The competition is simultaneously for the master's and PhD here. So it is a wide array of competition. We usually get about 200 to 250 applications for this one for the Canadian domestic quota. We get a large amount of applications, but we also get a large amount of scholarships. There's usually about 60 or so, 60 to 70 of these scholarships. And when you take into account the students who get federal funding, we get quite a bit of external scholarships for our students. Within the Ontario Graduate Scholarships, there is also an international competition. So this is where the international students are eligible to apply. There is an international competition. It is a lot more competitive. The Ontario governments, unfortunately, in the last few years have cut back on the amount of funding that is available through this competition. The university in general, the last few years have gotten 7 of these scholarships for the whole university. So it is extremely competitive. There has been some years where the Faculty of Social Science have not gotten any in the international competition. And then there has been an increase the last few years where we've gotten 3 out of 7 just this past year. So it is unfortunate that there's only a limited amount of the scholarships from these funding agencies, but it is still an opportunity for our students, but it is extremely competitive at the international level. Similarly, and something that is often overlooked is the FQRSC. So this is the OGS equivalent for Quebec. Now, a lot of people will say, well, the University of Ottawa is not in Quebec. We do have a special exemption in the sense that Ottawa is exempted and is included into the eligible universities eligible for the FQRSC. Now, this is, again, a master's and doctoral scholarship competition. They have their own separate competitions, but it's managed completely by the government of Quebec. So it doesn't go through the University of Ottawa. We don't have a pre-screening. We don't have a lot of information on how the competition works, but we did want to flag it. This one, unfortunately, for Quebec is eligible for only Canadians and permanent residents. And the eligibility is you need to be either a Quebec resident, or if you've lived there long enough to be considered domiciled in the province of Quebec. This is typically if you're eligible for RAMU, the health insurance, and you've received the health insurance, then you are technically eligible for the FQRSC. This is a $17,500 scholarship. It covers the year. This one's renewable. There's a lot of options for students who are from Quebec. Now, it's important to note, we're going to be throwing a lot of information to you guys. So don't worry, we're going to send this PowerPoint, we're going to send this recording, and then our team is going to be available to answer some of this more complex questions. So can apply for all the ones that you're eligible, the provincial ones and the federal ones if you're eligible. And especially at the provincial ones, if you're a Quebec resident, you should apply for the OGS and the FQRSC. You cannot hold both the federal and the provincial scholarships at the same time. So if you get the more prestigious federal scholarship, and typically it's more amount, there are restrictions that you can't hold both. So you'll have to pick one or the other. Usually you pick the one that's worth more financially. But there have been provisions in the past, and I haven't seen any changes to this effect. There is nothing restricting holding both provincial ones. So if you are a Quebec resident, you should apply for OGS and you should apply for FQRC, and it's possible you might be able to hold both scholarships at the same time, assuming they haven't made any changes. So we're going to go into a bit more details about some of the different deadlines and requirements. So we're going to start off with the masters. Like I said, this is a bit of a head start for you guys. September's a bit early. The master deadlines are a bit later. So for the CGSM, which is the Shirk, the NSERCs, and the CIHRs, these are the Canadian Graduate Scholarships for the masters. The deadline is December 1st. So you've got a lot of time, but once you start seeing what it encompasses, it's important to start getting ready to get ahead on that front. Again, for the OGS, the provincial one, the deadline is again December 1st. So still a lot of time, but there's a lot of prep work that you can do in advance to make sure that you get ahead of the game. It is important to note that the Quebec provincial equivalent for the master, the deadline is fast approaching. It is October 4th. So it's very important to start getting ready if you're eligible for this scholarship, to start getting your application ready to make sure that you respect the deadlines. Part of the reasons we do these information sessions so early in the year is the PhD competitions are much sooner. So for the federal funding agencies, the Shirk, the CIHR, the NSERC, at the PhD level, the deadline is October 17th. So that is fast approaching. Usually the PhD students are usually aware of these deadlines, but if you're not, surprised, it's time to try to get ahead and try to get your spend as much time as possible on these applications. Fortunately enough, you get a little reprieve for the OGS. The deadline is December 1st for that competition for the PhD as well. So you've got a bit of time for that provincial funding. But again, with the Quebec FRQSC, the deadline is October 4th. So a lot of these the federal funding agencies have their own proper portals through the funding agencies. So you apply directly through them, and then they send us the files. And they should be active at this point. The OGS is through a University of Ottawa portal. For those who applied last year, it was a new portal. There was a lot of technical issues. There was a lot of problems with the reference letters. They should be resolved for this year. All positive news so far from our updates. So we're encouraged it'll be a smoother experience this year. But it's to keep an eye out. That portal usually gets activated in early to mid-October. And as for the FRQSC, it's dealt directly through the Quebec government, so it would be through the FRQSC websites. So am I eligible? So let's start off with the OGS. So the Ontario Graduate Scholarships. So this is eligible for Canadian students, permanent residents, refugee students, but there's also within that competition a separate competition for international students. So OGS is the one that would be applicable to international students. Fourth year students who are here who are currently doing their bachelor's would be like, why are you talking to me about external funding? The way these funding agencies work is that it's for the upcoming year. So if you're planning on doing graduate studies next year, these scholarships take effect either spring 2024, fall 2024, or winter 2025. So you always have to think 1 year and ahead for external funding. So for OGS, if you're thinking of coming to the University of Ottawa next year, you apply directly with us, and then you could potentially get this additional funding to your master's next year or your PhD. If you're thinking of going to Carleton, first off, why are you going to Carleton? We have a better program, but you would have to apply directly with the OGS for Carleton if you're planning on going there. So it's with the intent of being enrolled full-time next year. So even if you haven't applied for admission next year, but you're thinking about it, you're on the fence, but you're like 50-50, there's no harm in applying for the external scholarship for the upcoming year. Obviously, if you're denied admission, you would not be eligible to hold the scholarship. So things to note for the master's programs: you cannot have completed more than 4 terms of their master's program. So if you're currently in the master's program and you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to do a PhD next year, I'm just going to continue doing the master's, you cannot have completed more than 4 terms of their master's program at the time the award is dispersed. Again, the earliest that the award can be dispersed is spring 2023. And the key term there is you cannot have completed more than 4 terms. So a lot of people have some issues in interpreting some of these different instructions because it varies from external funding agency to another. So if you have doubts about your eligibility in terms of the amount of terms completed, don't hesitate to reach out to us at scsgrad@uottawa.ca. If you didn't catch that email, I guarantee I'll be repeating it a dozen times throughout this presentation, and we do have it on a slide at the end, so don't worry. And the same thing with the PhD. Applicants cannot have completed more than 13 terms of their PhD program. Oftentimes at the PhD levels, there's different leaves of absences, or there's different semesters where there's activities. It becomes a bit more ambiguous in those instances. If you have doubts about your eligibility, do not hesitate to reach out to us. This is typically one of the first few things you should be checking before you endeavor into the preparation of your files, because you could spend a week or 2 or 3 weeks on your file, and then if you don't meet that requirement, we are obligated to deny your file because we have to respect the criteria established by these funding agencies. So that's usually question number 1 that you should start with to make sure that you meet the basic eligibility requirements. The next major aspect in terms of the eligibility requirements, and this touches on the federal funding agencies and the provincial funding agencies, is these are excellence scholarships. So they have a certain average that they are searching for in certain instances. And they have different rules of calculating. Whenever it comes with governments, instead of making our lives simple, they like to find different complicating ways to come up with different criteria. So there are 2 different types of calculations at the OGS level. For students who've completed less than 24 months of graduate studies, we take the last 2 of their academic years as separate entities. So we take, if someone's just finishing up their 4th year, we take their 4th year and we take their 3rd year of complete full-time studies, and we treat them as separate entities, and both of them need to have an average over 8.0. If you have a 9 and a 7, they may average to 8, but both entities actually have to be over 8 to be eligible. So the 9 and the 7 example would be ineligible. We're going to go through the calculations because we have a lot of students that have questions and confusion over the average calculations. We do not set the rules. We do need to abide by the rules because we do get audited. So if there are doubts about your averages, again, scsgrad@uottawa.ca, we can help you out. If you have straight A pluses and you're questioning whether or not you meet the 8.0s, you got an 8.0 if you got straight A pluses. There are a special twist for the students typically in the PhD levels, or those with multiple masters. If you have done more than 24 months of studies at the graduate level, they do not take the last 2 years. They take every single course that was followed at the graduate level, and that average needs to be above 8.0. So we're going to go into more details in that shortly. That's a basic overview for the OGS. Perfect. In terms of Shirk, unfortunately for the federal funding agencies, the Shirk, the NSERC, or the CIHRs is only eligible for Canadian citizens or permanent residents. This slide focuses on the PhD level, but I'll also touch upon the master's level. So if you're going into the PhD, you can apply for the Shirk PhD. If you're going into the master's, there's a separate competition with a different deadline. There are certain restrictions. You cannot apply for all 3 funding agencies. So if you're in psychology and you're doing a little bit of research that touches on health and a little bit that touches on the humanities, you need to pick one federal funding agency. If you apply to multiple ones, you will be disqualified. So it's important to speak with a potential supervisor. If you're in the 4th year, and you don't know which funding agency, speak to the professors in your unit. They'll be more than happy to assist you and guide you in this. And it's in their interest as well. The more students who have federal funding agencies, federal funding, the more successful they are in their programs, because they don't have to do 2 or 3 part-time jobs in terms of succeeding at their masters. You need to make sure that you haven't exceeded your the number of months in the PhD program. So the Shirk PhD has 2 types of scholarship. They, like I said earlier, they have the doctoral scholarship, which you need to have not completed more than 24 months, but then they also have a 48-month fellowship. So if you're within the first 4 years of the PhD, you are still eligible for Shirk PhD funding, but it's just the doctoral fellowship. So it's a little bit less money. Conveniently, you can be considered for both within the same application, so you don't have to overthink it. It's just one application. The masters, you need to be within 12 months of the program by the December 31st. So those who've just started in the fall are eligible. Those who are going to be starting next fall are eligible. Those who are further along in their program would have some issues. I'll take this opportunity at this time. I can't see the chat at the same time, and usually when I try to read the chat and do a presentation, I get distracted. We often get the question, are students who are in the course-based program eligible for any of these the fundings? So we haven't seen some of the revised terms of references for these funds. Typically they are eligible, but they have a bit of a higher difficulty in terms of justifying the research that they will be doing. So there are a lot of course-based programs that do have some research aspects to it. If you look at the Masters in Sociology in the spring of the end of the first year, they do have like a capstone course that does have a research project in some form. So there is ways for course-based students to get these fundings, but you need to inform yourselves within the funding agencies because they sometimes have been adjusting these criteria on the fly. We oftentimes get a lot of students who are interested in our psychology program, and the psychology program that we have here is a bit unique because it is an MA PhD program. So I will take a slight detour on this and do a special announcement on this. The MA PhD students, so if you're in the 4th year of your bachelor's program and you're interested in the MA PhD in psychology, clinical psychology or experimental psychology, you would be applying for the Shirk or the NSERC or the CIHR at the master's level. So that's straightforward for those who are going from the 4th year. You're looking for the master's funding because your first year will be in the master's. Now, those who just started this past fall, you do have a special exemption that you can continue to apply as long as you haven't exhausted the maximum amount of the Shirk Masters funding. You can apply in your first year of the Masters again to the Masters competition. The reason and the rationale we've gotten behind this and the advantage of this is because you can activate it in the spring 2024, so this upcoming spring, because you're still in the Masters. What this does is it prolongs the amount of eligibility you have at the PhD level for scholarships, and it increases the amount of years you can be funded. So for the Master's PhD program in psychology, there are some exemptions for you. So if you have some doubts, don't hesitate to contact us at SCS Grad to check whether or not you're eligible. But there are some special designations for this program in particular. I'm not going to go too much into details, but this doesn't prevent other students who are in different programs. If you're starting any of our other masters, you're still eligible, assuming you meet the other criteria, to apply for the Canadian graduate scholarships with the Shirk, the NSERC, and the CIHRs. But psychology has a special situation with their fast track program.
Okay. So now that we have looked at funding options, deadlines, and eligibility criteria, let's look at how you actually write your proposal and look at the evaluation process. Okay, so getting started. So it's always better to start early. So you have this session, which is early on. So we recommend that you write many drafts and revise those drafts, have friends read it, professors read it, maybe your forthcoming supervisor at some point. So try an exercise and write summaries, you know, like a little abstract of 200 words. Just work on that. And it really is a matter of working on it and revising it. And we want to stress the fact that you should contact your referees as soon as possible. You know, I've been teaching at the university for 30 years, and I've accompanied a lot of students through this process. It's always better to contact the prof that you would wish to have a reference from really early on, because you don't know if that prof is going to be available or want to write a reference, et cetera, et cetera. So please give them time to ask them politely if they want to be your referee, and give them a chance to read your application. If you are in the PhD program, don't assume that you can write your letter the same one as you wrote your letter for acceptance in the program, because the audience has changed and the committee is interdisciplinary, so you have to speak to people outside your discipline. And when you're writing your proposal, pay attention to events in the world around you, because you can draw something from that to help grab people's attention when you write your proposal. So, and also double and triple check the deadlines. That's important, because, you know, we had horror stories where the person forgot it was yesterday and there's no way back. You know, they will not accept your application a day late, even 5 minutes late. So what's in an application? First of all, you complete the application form online. Okay, so that's the first thing. The program information, the area of study, your research proposal, your bibliography and citations, allowable inclusions, research contributions, relevant experience and activities, supplement and or join special initiatives justification pages if you want. You should have an official letter from the registrar to confirm your kind of status, an up-to-date official transcript of undergraduate and graduate levels studies, and letters of appraisal. Okay, so you will need to have all those in. Okay, you have to fill all those in, and we'll get through this with you in the next few slides. Terry. So now the evaluation criteria. So as I said, the selection committee is multidisciplinary. So it's really important that you try to speak to a multidisciplinary audience. So you have to have your past academic results demonstrated by transcripts, awards, and distinctions, the program of study and its potential contribution to the advancement of knowledge. So you have to show that you will be contributing something to knowledge creation, relevant professional and academic experience, including research training as demonstrated by conference presentations, scholarly publications, and of course the 2 written evaluations from referees. We often find that, you know, even if you're a very strong candidate and your marks are very high, you have to sell yourself. You've got to be writing a proposal which shows how much you can contribute, because they won't count just your average and all that. It's what your proposal is saying. So that's really important.
So just to give you an idea of the different processes. So for OGS, for the Ontario Graduate Scholarships, like I said, the portal will open around early to mid-October. You submit your application directly through the University of Ottawa. Once we get the applications on December 1st, once the application is closed, we usually get it within 24 hours, all the completed files. We start doing verifications. We start looking at the number of months to make sure that you meet that eligibility criteria. We make sure that you haven't exhausted the amount of years that you can hold the OGS scholarship, and we check the average. We then, in the event that you're ineligible, we advise you. We send an email, usually on my behalf. We invite you to meet with us if you, we explain why you're ineligible. If it's clear and you understand it and you accept it, that's fine. If you feel like there's a mistake, we have an opportunity to take the time before we send it to the evaluation committees to make any corrections. We get about 200 to 250 OGS applications. We also at the same time get about 100 for the Shirk and Circ and CIHR master's level all at the same time. Sometimes the student forgets to include a transcript that may have made a difference. Sometimes it's human error. We create a buffer that we have time to make any corrections that has no impact on the evaluation by the departments and then the faculties. So once we have all the eligible files, we send it to a departmental committee. They do an initial screening and they establish their own ranking. So what's been new the last few years, or the last year or so, is that each unit then gets a quota based on their historic average and as a function of the number of applications that are eligible. So each unit gets prioritized with their experience or expertise, the OGS recipients for the Canadian competition. Now, for the international OGS competition, we have a second tier of evaluations because we do not have a guaranteed quota of the amount of scholarships. So we have to then send our strongest files to the faculty to the university competition. So once the department does the initial ranking, a faculty committee will merge the various departments' rankings to identify the top students for the faculty to then compete for the university competition. Once all the rankings are done, we submit to the university, and they are typically announced around mid-April, mid to late April, because we do so after the federal funding is announced, because a student cannot hold both the federal and the provincial funding. So students who receive the federal funding will then be dropped from the list for the provincial funding, because obviously with the higher amount of the federal fundings, the students will take that funding. So that's for OGS. In terms of the Shirk, for the federal funding agencies, everything's done through their websites. So we're going to go through some of the particularities of their websites. It is a bit confusing with the federal funding agencies. One thing I'll repeat later is if you're currently a student here at the bachelor's level and you're thinking about doing a master's at another university, you would have to apply through that university for the master's scholarship. For the PhD levels, for the PhD scholarships, even if you're doing your master's here or if you're currently a PhD student, you need to apply through the University of Ottawa. We are an institution with a quota. For the PhD scholarships, they are transferable to other universities, but at the master's level, they are not transferable to other universities. So at the master's level, we get a guaranteed quota for the University of Ottawa. For the PhD level, we can recommend to the national competition a certain amount of files. So typically for Shirk in particular, we get about 70 to 80 applications, and we typically are able to recommend about half of those files to the national competitions. If a student is successful at that point, if they're currently not at the PhD level and they want to do their PhD elsewhere in Canada, it is transferable. If they're currently with us, then the scholarship stays here. So there are a lot of particularities around the doctoral scholarship. So the deadline for this one, again, I can't stress at the PhD level, it's October 17th. It's through the Shirk portal or the CIHR or NSERC portal, depending on your field of study or research. And around October 19th or 20th, we get all the files at that point. Once again, we do an evaluation of the basic eligibility. At the PhD level, the advantage is there is no average calculation. Their evaluation criteria is slightly different at the PhD level for Shirk, but the number of months, the previous maximum amount of funding still applies. So we do check eligibility. We do notify students who are ineligible. We do have time to make corrections. And then again, we go through the departmental ranking, and then we do a faculty ranking because, again, we have to nominate a specific amount of students for the national competition. The master's is different in the sense that each unit is, again, allocated a quota. So they do a departmental ranking, and the faculty will determine quota based on previous success rates, the number of eligible applications, etc. There's a whole formula around that. I want to take a special moment to mention the Shirk Masters in particular. The previous years, the number of scholarships given to the university versus the number of eligible files who do gain admission to our programs has been below what we've actually been allocated from the federal funding agencies. So last year we exhausted our wait list for this funding. We had a lot of great fourth-year students who ended up applying for a master's who didn't even think of applying for these funding agencies. I've been hearing of a lot of units trying to ramp up the number of applications for these fundings because this is 17,500 for the year. That is a lot of money. And we actually exhausted our wait list last year, and everybody who was eligible, who was admitted, ended up getting a scholarship. Now, I can't guarantee that this upcoming year if suddenly I get a large influx of applications, but this one in particular has had the highest success rate of getting scholarships for the master's level at Shirk. It is not necessarily the case. It is not the case for CIHR because we have a stricter competition for medicine and health sciences. So we have not exhausted our wait list in that competition. And the same thing for the NSERC for the sciences. Again, with a mix of medicine, engineering, and science, we have not exhausted the wait list. But for the Shirk, not only have we exhausted the wait list, but the university has exhausted their wait list. So this is a great opportunity. I just got distracted by the chat. For Shirk doctoral scholarships, we do not have a guaranteed quota for the university. So we are able to nominate a special amount for the national competition, but we have zero guarantees of how many scholarships we get. So typically for 70 or to 80 students, we can nominate 35 to 40 students. And typically we've ranged from about 50% of those students eventually getting it. But so about anywhere from I've seen 18 to 25 the last few years. So, but we do not have any guarantees, and not everyone will get at the Shirk doctoral level. But the master's level at Shirk is a great opportunity that I really want to emphasize. This is where a lot of people have a lot of difficulty. We've tried to come up with some of these graphics to render this a bit more clear. So this does not apply to Shirk PhD or CIHR PhD or NSERC PhD. So the federal funding agencies at the PhD level do not require an average. However, OGS, both masters and PhD, and the master's funding agencies federal funding agencies do require these two different types of average calculation. So if you're in your fourth year bachelor's program, you're going to get this first calculation. So anybody 24 months or less of graduate studies, we take the last 2 full years of full-time equivalency. So if you've done part-time studies, there's variations to the way the calculations are done. 2 part-time semesters are equal to 1 full-time semester. So we look at the full-time 1-year equivalencies. We take each of the last 2 years as individual entities, and both of those years need to be above 8.0. So in the example here, we no longer use decimals. The system has evolved over the last year or so. But if this semester, this example, you have an 8.5 and this one's a 7.9, this student would be ineligible because both semesters need to be above 8.0. I can't stress this enough. If you've got straight A's, like A's, A minuses, A pluses with nothing underneath that, don't ask us for a verification, you're good. If you've had a semester where your grades are a bit off and you have some doubts, please check with us. We're willing to help you out here. As long as you're proactive and you reach out to us in advance. If you contact us 2 days before the deadline saying, hey, can you do a quick calculation? The answer will most likely be no, because we're preemptively doing calculations on completed files. So we need to prioritize those who are proactive. In terms of those who've done more than 24 months of graduate studies, so those typically who've done multiple masters or entering the PhD level, it's every single graduate studies course that you've ever completed. So even if you completed a graduate studies course while doing your bachelor's, that gets counted. And the cumulative of all those courses combined need to be above an 8.0. I put the U Ottawa grade scale as an example underneath. It is easily Googleable, part of the academic regulations on the U Ottawa website. So I'm going to highlight some of the key things. We convert all other institutions to the equivalent of the U Ottawa. So maybe you had 90% at another university. A lot of universities are pretty much a similar grading scale than us, but everything does get converted. These scales have been developed by experts using international tools. Everything gets converted to the U Ottawa grade scale. So maybe if you had an 80% at another university, it might not necessarily be equivalent to an 80% here. So there are adjustments here, and everything is expert derived conversions using internationally recognized tools. So if you have some doubts about how your previous studies at a foreign university or a different province, check with us. Some institutions don't have a C minus. We don't have a C minus, or some institutions don't have a B minus. There's a lot of variations, so there's different quirks around the average calculations. If you have all A pluses, please don't send us an email. But if you have doubts, don't hesitate. The weight of a course, so a 6-credit course versus a 3-credit course, does play into effect in our calculation tool. So it does have a 6-credit course is like counting it twice. So an A plus in a 6-credit course has a larger weight than a 3-credit course. We often get the question of summer semesters, are they counted? They are counted. Any numerical or alphanumerical grades are considered in the calculations. S and S grades are not taken into considerations. And a year is considered based on full-time equivalents. So if you never take spring semester courses, we're talking about the last 2 years is fall, winter, fall, winter. But if there's part-times or if you take summer semesters, there is some variations in terms of how the calculation is calculated. And we usually do it to the advantage of the student. But if there's any doubts, don't hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Terry. A lot of information about average calculation. It's a lot of information. Thank you. Okay, let's come back to the application, the program of study. So this is the single most important part of the application. So again, when you fill out this program of study part, keep in mind your audience. Okay, who are you talking to? Trying to use non-technical language, no jargon, because this is a multidisciplinary committee. Contextualize. Why should anyone else care about this subject? So you've got to show how the subject is really important and why is this research timely and important. And do not say this has never been done before. First of all, it's not a justification, but also it might not be true. It might have been done and you don't know about it. So you have to be careful. So why you? Do you have the skills to undertake this work? Why should we be funding you? So reference anything you have written, anything your supervisor has written, if it is relevant to your project. And don't just fill out the space with citations, references, just to fill out the space. If the topic is controversial, take your position, but you communicate it in a way that you are also respectful of other differing perspectives. So this is the program of study. Next. Let's talk about the components of the program of study. So begin with an example that demonstrates the importance of the project. Do not save the interesting stuff for the end, because when you start the program of study, this is what they'll be starting to read. So it's important to give them a good, solid introduction. The example you provide should help to contextualize the project for the non-specialist. Above all, it should be interesting enough for a committee of scholars from a range of disciplines other than your own.
Hey, it's back to me, but only just for one slide, so don't worry. So we're going to look at the different evaluation criteria. We're going to focus on the Shirk specifically. It's applicable also to the NSERC and the CIHR. The OGS one is similar to the Shirk, but we haven't gotten the final version of it. So for the Shirk, so the federal funding agency at the master's level, there is an emphasis on academic excellence. Again, that's why they require the admission average calculation. 50% of the weight is academic excellence. There's a 30% component of the research potential. So a lot of the fourth year students who yet haven't even given a full thought about whether or not they're going to do a master's, they might not have an idea of what their research is going to be yet. So that's why there's a little bit less weight on the research potential. But maybe you're working on your honors thesis this year and you've got an idea of where you want to go. It's just flushing that out a bit. And then there's a 20% personal characteristics and interpersonal skills. So at the master's level, it's really looking on the potential. At the PhD level, the academic excellence is not even in there. So that's why they don't even ask for an average calculation anymore at the PhD Shirk level. So they're looking really at your research ability based on what you've started doing at the master's or what you've been starting at the PhD, and where it's going to go. So the potential. And then that's when they start looking at what you've done. So the relevant experience and achievements, conferences, publications obtained within and beyond academia. So there is quite a variance between the different evaluation criteria for these funding agencies.
Thank you, Terry. So what kind of questions does a member ask itself about your project? So first of all, they'll be saying, is this project clear? Is it clearly articulated? Is it, when you start reading it, you're thinking, what does it mean? If there's too many questions, it's really not well done. Is it doable, feasible in the allocated period of time? Because often what I see is that you have a big project with my students. At least sometimes, they want to do so much, but it's not doable. Somebody would read it and say, well, that would take 10 years, right? So is it doable? And that's important. It will be, taken into account when they evaluate your proposal. Is it grounded by a solid methodology that is vigorously defended? We'll come back to the methodology later. So we know that projects change, that ideas change, that's okay, but you need to communicate that you have a clear handle on what you want to do. And you probably ask yourself at this stage of your career, well, I'm not sure yet. Well, you have to sound, that you're handling this, right? So of course, things might change during the process. It's okay. And this is why it's important to talk to your supervisor or other profs about your project. So you get, more comfortable with it and you can argue, your project proposal. So questions also the committee will ask and will be looking at is how you situate yourself in the current theoretical debates around the topic of your research, because you've got to establish yourself as the authority or the expert to be or incoming around the subject. It's not to say that nothing has been done in the field before, of course not. So you have to situate yourself, see what's been writing on the subject and fit into this, and you'd be contesting it, maybe challenging it, but you have to show how the field has evolved. So if possible, try to be positive in framing your contribution rather than saying everything written about a subject is useless. That's really not a way to be writing your proposal. So section 3, section 3, description of the project. Okay, so the description of your project must be concise given the space limitations, because you'll see you have the space available, you've got to work within that. So you've got to be concise, right? You've got to have the main points given. It should be outlining your contribution to existing debates and literature. Okay, so what's your contribution here? It should describe how you actually intend to carry out the project. Even if you're not entirely sure, you need to communicate that you are. Okay, this description of the project is really the most important section because it's really, it's concentrated and it's really important. The next part, which is really important, is methodology. And I would say this is where students struggle. It's often neglected and it can often sink an application, and that's true. Ideally, it helps to demonstrate that you have given serious thought to how you are going to execute your project, because you might have a good frame, a good proposal, but how are you going to get at it? What's the main approach you're going to mobilize in the research? Is if it's mixed methods, discuss clearly why you have opted for this. Are you doing interviews? Are you doing questionnaires, etc., etc.? So you have to show how you will be analyzing your material. What are the key texts that are guiding your analysis? Terry.
It is on mute.
That's not bad. That's the first time today that's happened to me. Usually it happens about 10 times a session. So as you start looking into these different funding opportunities, you're going to get a lot of questions. Here's some of the key things that we just want you to keep in the back of your mind when you're preparing these applications. These are things that students have shared with us, have been successful in their review processes. Proofread several times your applications, not just yourself, but get some friends. I often will revise a document 100 times, and then someone looks at it with fresh eyes and they'll find like things that are blatantly right in front of me. So proofread it yourself, but get some friends to help it. Ask friends or colleagues in another field to read your applications. As Sylvie mentioned earlier, a lot of the evaluations are done by multidisciplinary people. So sometimes we're so focused on our own field and we get a tunnel vision that we don't realize that this isn't very clear and understandable for those who may not necessarily be experts in the field. So make sure that you get colleagues not just within your own field to take a look at this. Can't stress enough the importance of being proactive with referees. Professors get busy around December 1st. That's the end of the semester. They're thinking about final exams. Do not wait till the last minute. Referees can sink an application. So make sure you're proactive, make sure that you're getting people that are committed, and make sure that it's people that can touch upon the aspects that are being evaluated in the application. Getting someone who gave you an A+, but you've never spoken a word to them and they don't know anything about some of these other aspects might be less of a less strong a reference letter compared to someone who given you an A- but knows a bit more about your outside the classroom research abilities or other lived experience. So it's very important to take a look at the referees. Have you ensured that the project is eligible for funding? So a lot of times, and I've seen this question in the chat, make sure that you're applying to the right place and make sure that you're not rendering yourself ineligible. I should have been more clear. There was a student in psychology that was asking, can I apply for both the master's federal funding and the PhD federal funding? I got to revisit that, but my understanding is you have to pick one. You have to choose one or the other. You cannot have two active applications with federal funding agencies. So it's not just through the different federal funding agencies like the science, health sciences, and social sciences. That is limited to one, but you can't try your chances in both federal funding agencies, the master's and the PhD level as well. We wanted to highlight some of the frequent confusion, especially with the federal funding agencies with the Shirk, NSERC, and CIHR. If you're currently at the University of Ottawa at the master's level, if you're planning on doing your master's here, you apply directly. Like when you get to the Shirk portal, you're currently registered in a degree program at a Canadian institution with a quota. So the University of Ottawa is a Canadian institution with a quota. Especially if you're at the master's level and you're planning on doing your PhD here or elsewhere, again, you're applying through us with a Canadian institution with a quota. So for Shirk, the University of Ottawa, Shirk, NSERC, NCIHR, we are a Canadian institution with a quota. If you apply directly to Shirk for their national competition for those who do not have a host institution with a quota, then you can render yourself ineligible and you may decrease your chance to go through. So I get distracted by we do not see the question, but for Shirk, there's no quota, right? We have a nomination quota for the Shirk PhD, so that's why we are an institution with a quota. So we have a nomination quota. We do not have a guaranteed quota of scholarships. At the master's level at Shirk, we do have a guaranteed quota of scholarships, but we are still considered an institution with a quota for the Shirk PhD because we have a nomination quota for the PhD competition. Another frequent thing, mathematics is hard. People struggle with the eligibility criteria for the number of months. Just between the federal funding agencies, which is you cannot have completed X amount of semesters by December 1st, and OGS is you cannot have completed X amount of semesters by the earliest start of the program. So they word things really finicky. It's very important to start with this question when assessing your eligibility for these programs. It is also important that your number of months should be in multiples of 4. So if you've just taken a 1-month course in the summer, do not just put 1 month, because your transcript will show a full semester and the funding agencies will consider that 4 months. So it should be a 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. I have sometimes seen someone apply with a number in that box that is larger than the eligibility criteria. If you enter a number larger than the eligibility criteria, please do not spend the time, the 2 weeks, the 3 weeks to fill out these applications chasing after references if you're ineligible. If you have doubts on the math, reach out to us, please. I can't stress how frustrating it is for you guys to fill out some of these applications with some of the requirements these funding agencies put in there. And they are not the same between the provincial funding agencies and the federal funding agencies. They have weird requirements in terms of the format. Word documents like a .doc or a PDF. They have limits on the size of the files. They have indents restrictions. They have page numbering restrictions. Very, 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 very important to look at it before you apply. You can't just copy paste what you're doing for the OGS and the Shirk. They don't have the same criteria. In some instances they do. In other instances they don't. It's very important to familiarize yourself as you're going through. I could spend about 10 hours talking about the differences and the particularities of each one, but I think none of us would want to listen to me for 10 hours. It's very important to make sure that you are respecting the bureaucratic criteria that they have established, because they're the ones giving the money. They set the rules. So it's very, very important, especially for the federal funding one that's done at the national competition. Do not get yourself ineligible by disrespecting the regulations. I know we just gave a lot of information. We're going to stick around, ideally to 2:30, but a bit longer if need be, to answer as many of your questions. Can't stress enough, we're here in person. We're here for virtual meetings. We're here for email questions. A lot of people will be like, well, Terry and Sylvie did the presentation. We'll write directly to them. Write to scsgrad@uottawa.ca. We have a full team of people that are quicker at answering, because we're frequently in meetings. So they're often the experts. So please write to us with any of your questions. If you want to have an in-person meeting, if we can't solve the problem, we're glad to meet with you. We put it on the link, which is the graduate studies page that has a link to all the different competitions. Some of these portals aren't live yet till early October. We've shared a video that was shared with us a few years ago. It's a student perspective of some of the mindset they go through when preparing these applications. We like to share it. It gives a more student-based perspective, but these are worthwhile opportunities. It is a lot of work, but there is a lot of money that's out there that would be beneficial to our students. So I hope you got a lot of information from here. We're going to stick around to answer any questions. I'll also go through the chats to start answering some of the questions. And if anybody wants to pose other questions, feel free.
Thank you, Terry. And I want to thank all the group, our office, who is answering your questions on chat, for example. And as Terry said, we're available to help you out, and give us a shout, and we're happy to be here. And as Vice Dean of the Graduate Studies, I want to offer you really good luck this year and have a great term. Enjoy yourselves. And also, you know that we have mental health and services at the university level and at the faculty level. So do not forget about that. And our doors are always open. So I hope to see you. Take care. And Terry and the group will stay with you to work on the questions with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sylvie. So I'm going to stop the PowerPoint. I'm just going to start off by reiterating that we will be sharing this recording and we will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation. My team has identified some of the questions that they don't think was answered during the chat, so they saved me all the fun ones. So I'll start answering these, and then I will try to catch up to live questions shortly. And then if you feel like your question wasn't answered, feel free to repose it afterwards. So I'm going to start off with a 1:16 p.m. question. Can you go abroad with OGS funding? So for OGS funding, we get a guaranteed quota that is good for only here. So if you're thinking of applying for Carleton and here, you would have to apply for OGS funding at both institutions. So that does not have the one application restriction. So OGS is non-transferable, and the master's Shirk are not transferable. The only one that are transferable is the federal funding at the PhD level. So OGS is not transferable, and OGS is typically just for Ontario universities, so it definitely does not go abroad. The 1:19 p.m. question, is it possible to keep both the differential tuition fees for the French immersion and the OGS scholarship? So the differential tuition fees applies to international francophone students who are doing a French program, master's program here. And if they do receive the OGS international scholarship, they are extremely competitive. You can hold both. So these funding, any of these external fundings do not have a direct impact on the admission scholarships or the merit scholarships or the PhD admission scholarships as well. They do have a slight impact if you are a recipient of teaching assistantships. It typically reduces your teaching assistantships in half because the purpose of these scholarships is for you to focus on your research, and with the additional funding provided by the external funding agencies, the hope is that you can focus more on research and work less to succeed at your master's or your PhD. If you received your NSERC USRA previously, does that count towards your lifetime limit or other restrictions? Vivian, you'll have to send us an email on that question. I believe they're mutually exclusive, and I don't believe the NSERC USRA plays into the lifetime NSERC funding, but I'd have to dig deeper in that one, and I don't want to lead you astray. As I mentioned at the beginning, the disclaimer, we do our best to answer the questions, but we do not override the regulations established by the funding agencies, and they are the most up-to-date, accurate information. But send us an email, Vivian, and we can dig deeper into that one. The 1:29 p.m. question, do reference profs need to be at an institution? A previous referee left academia this semester. Nope, no restrictions on where they are. There are restrictions that they need to be French or English, but there is no restrictions as long as they are they can properly assess your abilities to do research or your academic excellence, especially at the master's level. So there are no restrictions in that respect. 1:31 p.m. question, are there any particular focuses that the doctoral Shirk is really looking for at the moment that we could kind of speak to more specifically or expand upon more? So we are early in the season in terms of our information sessions. We haven't received the most up-to-date information of some of the new changes to these funding models. We usually, unfortunately, get them in the upcoming weeks, but we want to be proactive in terms of students preparing for their applications. We haven't had any of the information yet for the particular focuses. There are sometimes special designations for Indigenous students. There's sometimes special designations for racialized students. We have not gotten to this date any of these special requirements. In the past, we have not been disclosed the information, and they are dealt with directly by Shirk. They don't disclose to us the student status, but we have been given additional quotas depending on how many students from specific groups that we've received or specific research, but we have not gotten those directives at this time. This question at 1:40 p.m., just to clarify, is the Shirk Master in the same application as CGS Master? Yes, sorry, I have the tendency of getting stuck in my own jargon for these scholarships, which is why one of the points from Sylvie was make sure to not get stuck in too much specific jargon from your field of study to make sure that it's easily accessible for multidisciplinary So the CGSM encompasses the Shirk, the NSERC, and the CIHR. So the Shirk master is essentially the CGSM master. So sorry for that confusion on my part. How do we use decimals to calculate a GPA grade average? So the university has actually moved away from decimals. Again, they just go based on the alphanumeric grade. So an A plus is a 10, an A is a 9 at the University of Ottawa, A minus is an 8. If you have doubts about the averages based on other institutions, we can take a look and help you as long as you're proactive in terms of reaching out to us. This one's an interesting question from Sarah at 1:40 p.m. How is my average calculated if I completed co-op terms in the last 2 years? Is only one semester calculated per year? So a co-op semester is considered a full-time semester, and it's not taken into account in the average because it's an SNS grade. So if your last year, if you did 2 co-op semesters and you did 1 semester of grades, it's just that 1 semester that of grades is counted in that year. So there are some particularities around co-op. There is a lot of confusion around co-op. So if you have some doubts, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Co-ops are always really interesting to do the average calculation because it is a bit dysfunctional. At 1:41 p.m., Emma asks, are these awards tax-free? I don't have the answer to that. I just give out the money and I don't know what happens at the other end. So we're looking into it. We are under the impression they are taxable because you do receive a T4A slip. I don't know if they're taxed at a separate rate. I'm not an accountant, but we're going to look into it. So if you have some questions around that, you can reach out to us. But taxable or not taxable, it's still money that you don't have to work for afterwards. So it's pretty nice. But I do not have the full answer on that one. Well, I've been corrected. It is taxable in caps. So yes, it is taxable. Thank you, Audrey. I will get to the live questions shortly. I do apologize. I just got 2 more outstanding questions, I think, from the previous chats. If a current OGS is expiring spring of 2024 and another OGS ends up being awarded after results come out in spring, can the new one be activated spring 2024? Yeah, so assuming that you haven't exhausted your lifetime maximum of OGS, OGS and the Shirks can be activated anytime as spring 2024, fall 2024, or winter 2025. The 1:46 p.m. question about FSS international field work and directed research considered for research potential. Research takes various forms, so any experience in research can be considered. So yes, international field work, yes, directed research. There's different, it takes various forms, and especially if you can get a supervisor that can comment on the particularities of there to help amplify the research that you did during those courses, that just adds value to it. Not just your perspective, but if you can get a referee that can attest to it. I don't know where I'm at in the time-wise, so I'm going to start at 2:03 p.m. And if I miss any ones before that, my team will flag it to me. So 2:03 p.m. We have a question from Sarah. If we are applying to the 2 MA programs, do we need to choose which one we want to apply for funding for, or can we do one for both since it's not transferable? This is a good question. Internally within our faculty, we can transfer it. We do have some flexibility on there. In the past, the Shirk Masters has been okay because we've exhausted our wait list, but OGS, we've asked the committees to reclassify. If someone applied for political studies and they've applied for public and international affairs, you can only apply for one of the 2 programs. So you'll initially get ranked in like political studies, but if then you suddenly have a change of heart and you want to apply for public and international affairs, we then ask them to reclassify. They are unfortunately not transferable between faculties. So that is the issue. So if you're debating between another faculty and ourselves, you do have to try to hedge your bets on the one that you're more inclined on applying, because An internal quota of scholarships is then given to the unit and to the faculty, and the faculties are not keen on giving away money to another faculty. So that gets complicated in that sense. But within our faculty, we do have that mobility possible. What is Queen Elizabeth II scholarship categorized, and how can we apply for it? I haven't really touched upon Queen Elizabeth II because it is typically more science-based, and it's typically requires a matching of an equivalent amount. I believe it's $5,000. So we have typically not had students who have been able to get funding from an external source to match that scholarship. So we see it oftentimes in science where federal departments or private firms will match the amount. So you need to have a matching component to be eligible. So you apply within the OGS competition. There's a checkbox, but if you do not have that matching component, the university has not had any unfunded Queen Elizabeth in the last few years. So if you don't have that matching capacity from an external source, a private enterprise or a federal government department, it's not going to go anywhere. Psychology sometimes has some, but we have not seen many in the last few years. A question from, and I saw a question earlier in the chat about OGS from a PhD environmental sustainability student. OGS is available for all disciplines. So there is no restrictions on the sciences. There is no restrictions on humanities. In the international pool, the university does divide the 7 scholarships that we do get. So there are 4 for the sciences and there are 3 for the humanities. Like I said, last year we did do a clean sweep of the humanities scholarships, but there is a lot of flexibility. There is no restrictions for OGS. I've lost track of where I was. 2:06 p.m. Well, apart from the ones mentioned today, are there internal U Ottawa bursary scholarships to apply for throughout the years, PhD levels? So scholarships.uottawa.ca. So if you go to that page, and the website the last few years has been difficult to navigate, so you might have to do a few clicks. There is some, it's rare that I have the French word in my head, and I don't have the English word in my head. There are some internal scholarships. These are donor funds. These are individual funds that are established with various criteria. So there are thousands of these scholarships. So if you go to scholarships.uottawa.ca, and usually there's a place for a student portal login, you can log in through your UO zone. These are funds given by donors, and there is a gazillion different criteria. Some of them are financial needs. Some of them are people doing research on a specific topic. Some of this is for specific demographics. When you go to that portal and you create a profile, the majority of these scholarships have 2 requirements. It's the profile that you develop within the financial aid tool, and then the other aspect is the financial needs scholarship. Some of these other scholarships will have additional criteria. If you're doing if the fund is for students doing a research in a particular field, they'll oftentimes ask for a description of research project, like a 500-word summary of your research. The majority of these funds have an October 31st deadlines. There are some variances within that. They are not managed by our office, so financial aid can give you a better guidance on those funds. But there are some great opportunities through there. A lot of them do have a low level of number of applications. Some of them are just for undergrads, some are for grads, some are just for PhDs. There's thousands of them. And I highly encourage that you take a look at those opportunities. There are other scholarships. Vanier Scholarship just closed or is closing tomorrow. We send some emails throughout the summer. But we don't have time to do an earlier information session. The research office does one in the summer that the invitations get sent out. There are other lesser known scholarships that don't necessarily go through us, so we don't have the expertise. There are some on the graduate cabinet webpage. I see Mackenzie King scholarships. We do not handle those scholarships internally, so we are not the experts. there is some information on the graduate studies page, and they might be able to give you a bit more guidance. But these are not scholarships that we typically have a lot of students who receive these scholarships in previous years. I've lost track of where I am. Okay. In terms of research contributions and relevant experience, what sections does this go under? So it varies between OGS and Shirk. They all have their different rules about where they want to see volunteer opportunities, where they want to see different research contributions. So they usually specify in this document, we want to see X, Y, Z, but it does vary from one funding agency or another. So I don't want to add confusion by saying where things should fall under. It's very important to respect the criteria. If you have doubts after reading the instructions and you're unclear, don't hesitate to reach out. One of the great sources of information is your profs that are potential supervisors or your current supervisors, because they're so used to navigating, especially the federal funding agencies, that they can give you guidance. A lot of these professors have done evaluations in the past. I have more of an administrative roles of making sure the files respect the criteria, but in terms of what goes what in the specific documentations, a lot of the professors or the units can better guide you in that regards. I know a lot of units have been trying to do some individual information sessions to coach you. I know political science, I believe, is doing one next week that they're going to talk about some of the tips and tricks, but the professors are there to help you. It's in their interest to have students that are financially supported to make sure that they can successfully focus on the research. So don't hesitate to reach out to professors. So I don't have a more concrete answer on the what should go in what section in particular, because it does have some variances between the different research funding agencies. If we're in a second year, can I apply for OGS and Shirk if my master's does not have a thesis instead has a major research paper? So major research paper is definitely eligible for both the OGS and the Shirk. I believe I said it earlier, but I may have said it in the French presentation this morning. Course space can be eligible unless they've revised it in the last few days. But they have a steep hill to climb, and they need to really, really work hard to justify how they're going to do some research within the course space component. But major research paper definitely are eligible, and is again, it's just properly documenting how you're going to do the research within the program. If we are in a second year of the psychology MA PhD program, would we put 4 months because last year was master's, or 16 months including last year? I'm having a little brain freeze on that one, Caitlin. Please reach out to us, SCS grad. I have to take a look again, but it's not coming to me right now, so we'll have to get back to you on that one, Caitlin. For psychology, should our research proposal be the same, similar for both the funding applications and the actual grad school application? It can, but admissions are often sometimes looking for different aspects. You want to make sure that you're refining your funding applications to the multidisciplinary audience. So if you're applying for psychology, maybe for your admission application, you really want to use those psych terms to make sure that you're really getting your point across, that you're knowing the content. But at the same time, for the funding agencies, you may need to take a more multidisciplinary approach. So it is not necessarily the same document that'll be used for both. If you have a professor in psychology that you know, or if you currently have a potential supervisor or a supervisor already identified, check with them, and they can give you some good advice on that regards. I think I'm caught up on the questions. If I have not answered your questions, because I'm sure I missed some, or you still have some outstanding questions, feel free to ask them now. Feel free to ask us via email. Feel free to stop on by. For the masters and the PhD OGS, we'll be doing a more condensed version in mid-October, once you've started taking a look at the applications, once you've let this information sink in. We will be sending this PowerPoint, and we will be sending this recording in the upcoming week. This is a lot of information, but reach out to people. If you're in the bachelor's program, reach out to people that are currently in the master's, try to get their insight. Reach out to professors that you trust. And this is worthwhile. As I mentioned, especially at the Shirk Masters, I do not like giving back scholarships after we've exhausted funding. I rather have a wait list and try to steal scholarships from other faculties. So leverage these opportunities. There's some great opportunities here. There's a lot of information, so don't hesitate once this is synced in to reach out to us. Thank you for your time today. We think this is really important information. I know this is a lot of information, but thank you for your time and all the best. I know it's the first 2 weeks of school. Best of luck with the start of the school year, and take care of each other. All right. Thanks, everyone.